This video is part of the series Learning from the Masters. In this video I'm going to cover the artist Eyvind Earle. Eyvind Earle was a Disney artist who was the colorist and art director for Sleeping Beauty. He painted the backgrounds for Sleeping Beauty and some other Disney classics like Toot, Whistle, Plunk and Boom, Lady and the Tramp, and Peter Pan. Before and after his career at Disney, he worked on his own art. Eyvind Earle is still a big inspiration to artists all around the world, and you can see his influence in animation features like Pocahontas, Open Season, Frozen, and the 2019 Netflix animation Klaus. Eyvind Earle had a very distinct style, which is both very graphical and very detailed. He works with big shapes to set up the layouts for Sleeping Beauty and painted very detailed backgrounds. Each scene of Sleeping Beauty is an artwork on its own. Each painting would take 5 to 10 days to complete. All of the paintings he painted in gouache. I hope you can paint a lot faster than that with the Stayf-Eyvind Earle BrushSet I created for Procreate. I'll leave a link in the description, or you can press on the eye in the upper right corner. Gouache is a paint you can paint with in different ways. You can apply it with lots of water and paint with it like watercolors. But you can also paint with it in an opaque way. This is how Eyvind Earle painted his backgrounds for Sleeping Beauty. In order to create the gouache brushes, I first needed to study real gouache on paper. You paint in layers with gouache, but you need to be careful, because when you use too much water, it activates the paint you have already laid down. You can also use it to your advantage to blend parts of your painting. It is a delicate balance between transparency and opaque. I created 3 main gouache brushes, the Stayf-Eyvind Taper, the Stayf-Eyvind Taper Dry and the Stayf-Eyvind Taper Wet. These are all tapered brushes but with different characteristics. In the tutorials I explain how to use them. All of the other brushes are structured brushes and shape brushes. Fortunately, there are some tutorials by Eyvind Earle from the documentary 4 Artists Paint One Tree that was released on April 30, 1958 as a segment of the Disneyland TV episode to promote Sleeping Beauty.
The best advice I have ever given to students who have studied under me has been just this: educate yourself. Do not let me educate you. I'm reading from Robert Henry in response to a question often asked in letters from art students.
Here Eyvind Earle explains his way of painting and what he is looking for in painting a tree. In this painting, Earle uses casein, a milk-based paint. He concentrates on painting the bark of the tree.
I see in this tree all the richness and variety that can be found in nature. I am not going to paint the whole tree. What I'm looking for is contained in the trunk as much as in any part of this tree. I intend to make a very detailed study of the tree trunk. In fact, you might call it a portrait of a tree trunk. I am working with casein, a watercolor type of paint. I find this medium ideal for working in fine detail. Of course, the first step is pretty rough. What I'm delineating here are the outside lines of the trunk. This will establish the silhouette, or outside shape of what I am painting. While I am primarily interested in the trunk, here now I've established the rough outline and the form of my tree trunk. And now I'm refining the form. I'm establishing directional lines that give movement and added form as well as the beginning of texture. Before I'm through, I mean to capture the texture of this tree trunk, the infinite detail within detail, the bark like a rich filigree, like ancient embroidered tapestries. Of course, each one of us is actually doing that, but in a different manner. And now I'm at the point I enjoy the most, that of creating on the surface of my painting, to the ultimate of my capacity, the rich, gnarled, worm-eaten, lichen-covered surface of the twisted, massive trunk.
As the four artists finish their pictures, it is interesting to see how very differently they turn out, even though they were all painting the same tree.
Eyvind Earle drew inspiration from the illuminated manuscripts De Très Riche Heures de Jean Duc de Berry, an opulent book of hours from 1419. Another inspiration were medieval tapestries. In the late 50s, animation artists were inspired by the fine artists like Matisse, Cézanne, Klee, Modigliani, and Picasso. It was a modern approach of painting. The innovative animation studio UPA was a trendsetter in making modern animation which drew inspiration from these artists. You could see the shift in style in advertisements and children's books illustrations. The style became more graphical with painted structures. In 1953, the Disney Studios released the short animation Toot, Whistle, Plunk and Boom that won an Academy Award. Eyvind Earle painted the backgrounds for this animation. The backgrounds of Sleeping Beauty were a mix of the medieval paintings and the modern style of the 50s. In the same film he explains how he painted the backgrounds for Sleeping Beauty. Next to him is Disney artist Walt Paragoy, who later was the art director for the backgrounds of 101 Dalmatians. All of the artists had to learn how to paint in the style of Eyvind Earle. In this segment of 4 artists paint one tree, he explains how he builds up his painting. The painting of Sleeping Beauty were done in gouache, working from dark to light in an analogous color scheme. Step 1. Start out with a big silhouette shape in black. Then paint the leaves surrounding the bush. Step 2. Paint in the leaves in a lighter value. Step 3. Paint other leaves with different shapes and add a greenish color to it. Step 4. The last pass, draw the highlighted leaves and add more detail. Let's try that out in Procreate. Step 1. Start out with a big silhouette shape in black. Then paint the leaves surrounding the bush. Step 2. Paint in the leaves in a lighter value. Step 3. Paint other leaves with different shapes and add a greenish color to it. Step 4. The last pass, draw the highlighted leaves and add more detail. I found this book, The Art of Disney, in my library, and I got it in, I think, 2008 from Disney artist Wilbert Pleinaar. He was working at the Disney Studios at that time. And it is a catalog of an exhibition that was held in Japan. And on page 46 and 47, you can see a progress or a tutorial on how to paint the bark of a tree. And so in this next segment, I'm just going to show you how Eyvind Earle painted the bark of a tree. The process is similar to in drawing the bush. I'm gonna start out with the Stayf-Eyvind taper. Just gonna draw a black shape. And gonna fill it with color drop. And I'm gonna set this one to alpha lock as well. First I'm going to use the structure brushes, the Stayf-Eyvind nozzle, to create more of a brownish undertone. And you can just tap this brush to create some structure. Maybe less color. The Stayf-Eyvind structure is also a good brush to do that. It has a bit of a dry brush effect. Or even the Stayf-Eyvind bark, which I created, to draw some bigger structures into the tree. And you can adjust the size, so you have a little bit more variety in your structures. Now I'm going back to the Stayf-Eyvind taper and draw some directional lines. And when you press harder, you get a thicker stroke. Also going to use the Stayf-Eyvind Taper Dry, which is a dry brush, so you get a little bit more structure. And this blends a little bit better than the Stayf-Eyvind taper. And the next pass is to follow these directional lines and create structure and depth into your tree. The light is coming from the right, so there's a little bit more light on the right side. And it's always good, to go outside and paint real trees to see how the bark looks and what kind of structures you can create within a bark of a tree. So everything that's lighter is more on the top, and everything that's darker is deeper down into the bark of the tree. So you can, play around with that. And, you can just play around with the width of your strokes. And you have to take your time, to paint in the style, because Eyvind Earle and all the other Disney artists took around 5 to 10 days to paint an entire background for Sleeping Beauty. So here I'm just, scratching the surface. And you can also change the color, because I want a little bit more of a blue tone on the right and more yellow on the left of the bark. So I'm just changing the color ring, and the value stays within the same value because it's still here, but I just change the color. And in that way, you can create some highlights that are cast from, the light that comes from the right. But you need to be very subtle. So I use these 3 brushes, to really paint. So the Stayf-Eyvind Taper, the Stayf-Eyvind Taper Dry, and also the Stayf-Eyvind Taper Wet. And the Stayf-Eyvind Taper Wet also picks up the color that's already on your canvas. It is similar to, painting on paper. When you use a little bit more water on paper with gouache, it picks up the paint that's underneath. And with this brush, you can blend your colors, because it also picks up the colors that are already on your canvas. So I'm going a little bit lighter. I need a more brownish or yellow color on the left of the tree, so I'm gonna change the color again. It's really about building up your structure. So you need to take your time, to make it a very detailed illustration or background. And slowly you see your painting come together. It's all about using different values. So it's by following the directional lines and, build up on that. And within those directional lines, you can paint other directional lines as well. You can also use some of the structured brushes to create more structure or different structures within your tree. And you can also color pick the colors so that you stay in the same color scheme. So the Stayf-Eyvind bark is good, to create some of these structures. And also blend a little bit more. So now I'm going over it with a darker value. To make the shapes a little bit stronger. And just use blacks, pure blacks, as your last resort, because you cannot go darker than black. I'm doing this all on one layer because then you really can build up your paintings, and especially with the Stayf taper wet, it picks up the paint that's already on your canvas. If you paint everything on different layers, you don't have that effect. And I can go on for a much longer time than this, but this is the principle of how he painted these kind of trees. In the book Awakening Beauty, there's also a step-by-step tutorial by Eyvind Earle, and it just shows how to paint a background or a segment of a background, and I'm just going to follow the steps and do it in Procreate. First step is to set up the background and paint the background trees in a lighter value. And what's so typical about the Eyvind Earle paintings that they're very graphical. So I'm just painting in some different trees in different values and made a stamp brush out of this typical Eyvind Earle tree. And I used the stamp brush to create the structure within that tree, and I think he also used stamps to create these structures. I also build up the bushes in the same way I did before, using all the different kind of structured brushes, and then just go, first do the structure, and then I can use the 3 different gouache brushes I created. So the Stayf-Eyvind Taper, the Stayf-Eyvind Dry, and the Stayf-Eyvind Taper Wet. And in that way, you build up the painting in a lot of different layers, because that's very important. When you look at his art, it took him around 5 days to 10 days to paint an entire background. So it's very detailed, and you have to slowly build up your paintings to get the same effect he did. Because all of the backgrounds are very detailed and very layered. This is an original background, and I'm just gonna zoom in just to show you how detailed these backgrounds are. So they're really built up, and they're still very graphical in some sense, and they also have a lot of structure. So I made a line art, and then I put that line art on top, and then I started painting the directional lines within the branch. So it's first the bigger directional lines, and then you build up, around those directional lines. So you have an indication how deep the branches are. So when you're using lighter colors, it really comes to the front. And when you use darker values, then it's deeper within the branch. When you look at the leaves he's painting, they're very graphical. So it's a mix between big shapes and very detailed background, and just build up your painting. Here I show a detail of the same painting I did, and it's still not detailed enough, because you need to take your time to paint in the style of Eyvind Earle, because it's really slowly built up into different layers. And this is the last painting I did. It was based on a Sleeping Beauty background, So at least the tree I copied from another painting. So first the big shape, then the directional lines, and I'm now slowly building up the colors. And you know, while you're painting, you can find, you know, paint smaller directional lines and then paint around them, and then you will find, you know, the shapes within the tree. And this is of course a time lapse. This took me around 2 hours to paint. So it's a lot faster when you would do it on paper with a real gouache. And you know, if you don't like a part of the tree, you just can paint over it and, you know, try it again. It's just defining the shapes and, you know, what's in front of a tree and what's behind. So the darker values, you know, are deeper within the tree, so the bark of the tree. And in this painting the light comes from the right, so there's a little bit more light on the right of the tree, but also on the left. And on the right side it's more of a yellow tone, and on the left there's a more blue tone. So you can, you know, play around with these different, so warm and cool colors, but you need to stay close into an analogous color scheme. And analogous is that you keep the colors close to each other. So if you would, you know, paint reds, then it just wouldn't have the same effect. So I learned a lot creating these brushes for the Stayf-Eyvind Earle BrushSet, and they're available on Gumroad, and I'll leave a link in the description box down below. There are 17 different brushes, and with these brushes you can paint backgrounds like this. I also painted another background, and I'll leave a link in the description box down below. It's a time lapse. There I paint the background using the layout, because the layouts were very important in setting up a background. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you like it, please give it a thumbs up or subscribe to my channel. And don't forget to hit that notification bell, because each time I upload a new video, you get a notification. Drawing is fun and practice makes perfect. See you next time. Doodles!